You are not live.
Good evening and welcome to the June 2nd Planning Commission meeting. If we can have a roll call, please.
Yes, Chair Gutierrez.
Here.
Commissioner Faulkner. Here. Commissioner Hinojosa. Here. Commissioner Lawrence. Here. Commissioner Pava.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
And Vice Chair Clow, Commissioner Satania, and Member Commissioner Toya are excused. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Faulkner, if you'll lead us. Thank you. And before we move to the approval of the agenda, Assistant City Attorney Raleigh has a few words for us, and I would also like Ms. Maggie Moore to introduce herself and give us a little background.
As far as the findings of facts and conclusions of law approvals go, we've decided that it makes more sense for us to as the Land Use Department, to do them at the next meeting to have them approved, instead of having them already ready at this, when the case is heard, because, you know, a variety of reasons, including we don't know how the commission is going to vote, and we end up usually doing a fair amount of revisions, including conditions, different outcomes, and such, and also just to help staff with time and not have to do revisions, just do them once and have them approved as they actually happen.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Ms. Moore.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. It's nice to meet you in person. I've had the chance to speak with you, a little bit over the last month since starting my position as the new planning manager in current planning. I look forward to working with you all, as we go forward, and it's nice to see you in person. And I don't know, my experience, I've lived in Santa Fe for about 18 years this July, and I had the opportunity to work for the state of New Mexico and Santa Fe County. This is my first, time working with the city that I've lived in for so long, and so I'm really excited to be here and to work with Jason and Pat and the team that we have currently, and growing that team to better serve the city and the commission. So thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. We're happy to have you, and it's nice to put a face to a voice. Moving on to the approval of the agenda. Any changes from staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have a few changes. So as Ms. Fagali mentioned, we won't be considering findings of fact and conclusions of law for the cases tonight. And then case 2022-4756, 2750 Boylan Circle Development Plan will be postponed to June 16th, 2022. And then both cases for 2022 Old Pecos Trail rezoning, 2022 5063 and 5064 rezoning and preliminary plat will be postponed to July 7th, 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Any changes from the commission?
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. If we can get a roll call, please.
Commissioner Faulkner.
Yes.
Commissioner Hinojosa.
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence.
Yes.
Commissioner Pava.
Yes.
And Commissioner Smith.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion has been approved.
Thank you. Moving on to the approval of the minutes. First, March 3rd, 2022. Any changes from staff?
No changes.
Thank you. Any changes from the commission?
Motion to approve. Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Faulkner. Yes. Commissioner Hinojosa. Yes. Commissioner Lawrence.
Yes.
Commissioner Pava.
Yes.
Commissioner Smith.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. Now the April 7th, 2022 minutes. Any changes from staff?
Mr. Chair, no changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any changes from the commission?
Motion to approve. Second.
Thank you. If we can have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Faulkner. Yes. Commissioner Hinojosa. Yes. Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Pava,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith. The motion has been approved.
Thank you. No findings, no old business, so we're moving on to new business. And the first is consideration of Bill 2022 junk car ordinance. Before we get started, I want to disclose to the commission that I am a licensed dismantler in the state of New Mexico, which means I do deal directly with junk cars. If anybody on this commission has an issue or would like me to recuse myself, I would be happy to. I don't see any conflict on my end, but I'll leave it up to the commission. Okay, seeing none, we'll go on with that. Thank you. Ms. Fagali?
There we go. I do have a bit of a slideshow. It's very short. See if we can get this to work. I believe the mic's on. Yes. There we go. Okay. So this is a ordinance to change two sections in the code, 10.5 and 10-14. 14-6.3. The short title of the bill is Vehicle Blight in Neighborhoods. It is changing essentially what is considered a junk car under the nuisance ordinances. So you have the language in front of you, but basically 10-5.3, we want to remove the definition of antique vehicle and just have special interest vehicle and inoperable vehicle. And it would change the age of a special interest vehicle from no less than 25 years to no less than 35 years old, and change the definition of inoperable to be more specific. And there is also an amendment that you should have from Councilor Romero-Worth that further sort of solidifies the definition of inoperable, makes it even more precise, more than two things wrong with the car, essentially, to make it inoperable, either wheels or windshields, and a few other things in there. And then it would also change 14-6.3 to add a couple more places. The vehicles cannot be parked within 3 feet from the front property line or blocking any sidewalk or public street. It would just explicitly say that. Clearly, you're not supposed to block sidewalks or public streets already, but it would be in this section of the code. And then add that any vehicle parked in a residential side yard or backyard would need to be screened from view from the public right-of-way, and has a bit more specifics on how to do that. So it's a very, short ordinance. It's just clarifying what makes a junk vehicle, essentially.
Thank you. This is a public hearing. Anybody from the public here to testify on this? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and turn it over to the commission. Commissioners? Commissioner Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Fagali, I just wanted to clarify that setback part of the change. So it is 3 feet from the front property line. So if there is a sidewalk that is set back, it is very possible that a car could be parked right along the sidewalk as long as it was more than 3 feet from the street. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is my understanding, Director Klug. Yes. But if the sidewalk is more than 3 feet, it can also not block the sidewalk.
Okay. It cannot block the sidewalk in any case?
Correct.
Okay. And it could be next to the sidewalk, there's no distance from the sidewalk, but it cannot be blocking the sidewalk in any way? Okay. Thank you. I just needed that clarification. Mr. Chair, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Lawrence. Commissioner Pava?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, Ms. Fagali, regards how this ordinance dovetails with vehicles that are actually parked in the city right-of-way. And certainly in my neighborhood and others in Santa Fe, maybe not in Wilderness Gate, but certainly in my neighborhood, there's a lot of examples of people using cars as basically like storage units, and they're in the public right-of-way, and I see them cited, but they're never moved. And the second piece of the question would be as regards what we call recreational vehicles and/or trailers, and are there other parts of the city code that address that sufficiently at this time?
I believe that recreational vehicles are addressed, and there are some other parts of the code that say how long vehicles can be parked on city streets without being moved. This is mostly in response to vehicles that are inoperable. There is a section in here that does deal with storing things in your vehicle, and that is not allowed unless they are, I'm trying to find it in the code here, unless they are things that are related to the operation of the vehicle. So you can't use the bed of your truck to store garbage, for instance, on a public street. So that is, does that answer your question, or is that something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to probe that just a bit, and you've answered sufficiently. Thank you.
Any other commissioners? The only thing I would want to add to this is to keep in mind if it's a true collector or somebody that does their own work, they're probably going to have two of the same to make one antique vehicle go. So with that in mind, as this goes forward, just if you're going to get down to specifics, that they are two of the same that can be there. And that being said, I think that a cracked windshield's a little bit of a push if you're working on antique vehicles. That's my only 2 cents on that. With that, I'm ready for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to recommend that the governing body approve the proposed amendments to the ordinance within the junk vehicle ordinance.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. For clarity, we don't need a roll call vote no more because we're not on Zoom. Is that correct, Ms. Magali, or do you prefer a roll call vote?
I believe it could go either way, Chair, so it's up to you.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Moving on, we're at case number 2022-5065, 101 Victoria Street, Certificate of Compliance. And Daniel Alvarado is the case manager.
Is it on? There we go. Give me a second to boot up. There it goes. Okay. All right, good evening. So this is case 2022-5065, 101 Victoria Street, Certificate of Compliance. The applicants are James W. Seabird and Associates for Bill Gentry, the owner, who are requesting a certificate of compliance for a lot that is non-compliant with city subdivision and zoning requirements for 101 Victoria Street. The property is zone R5, which is 5 residential units per acre, and consists of 1.258 acre lot with 1 dwelling unit. So the certificate of compliance is to retroactively essentially legalize a lot split that was done in 1964 through family transfer warranty deed without city approval. However, we did find that in 1964 that lot split would have been denied under the zoning code of that time, and under current zoning it also would have been denied. because of the density requirements. I'm going to go into a little more detail about why that is. So because of that, we have to recommend denial due to the letter of the law. However, I think there may be a path, should you choose to follow it, to grant it under perhaps the family transfer provision, which is a lot split provision, which allows a lot split to have a higher density than it normally would under our typical zoning standards. So I'll explain that in a little more detail, and I believe the applicants are here to explain the case in further detail after that. So just want to go over the details of this because it is fairly legalistic. The zoning ordinance, of course, went into effect in 1962, and the original lot split was not was approved or was granted or created in 1964 without city approvals. We're operating under the assumption that the family did not know that they had to get city approvals at that time, as was common in the period. Then fast forward to 2022, the current owner can't do anything with the property without a legal lot of record, so they need a certificate of compliance. However, as I've noted at that time, the zoning, which was R5, well, I'll go back. At this time, the zoning is R5, which would allow for 1.8 units per acre. Under our zoning law, we round down, so they can only have 1 unit per acre, so that lot split would have been denied. Under the zoning in 1962, or 1964 and 1962, it was zoned R5, but at that time, we found that the zoning was based on lot size. So an R5 required a 50-foot wide and 6,000 square foot area of a lot size. The lot that was created, 103 Victoria, is not that size, therefore it wouldn't have met that R5 zoning criteria. So under those two levels of regulation, the lot split would have not been approved. However, we did find that if the application had come in today, where the family, the father of the original owner, split the lot for his son, then we would have granted that lot split because the density would have been rounded up rather than down. So there is that argument, and I believe that's the argument that the applicant is going to make. But as I said, we have to recommend denial based on our understanding of the zoning law. So that is it for me. I will hand it over to the applicants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarado. Mr. Siebert?
Incognito.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Victoria Dalton, 915 Mercer Street, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, staff, for your presentation. It was really accurate in the statements. And just to add to staff's presentation, the intent of the 1964 deed transfer was to pass the subject property onto family at the time of their death. As far back as Santa Fe goes, it's always been a tradition to purchase enough land in order to pass down to their children, sisters, brothers, uncles. The subject property remained in the family until the passing of the recipient of the property in 1989. The deed transfer occurred without the knowledge that the city adopted a new code 2 years prior. If the family would have been aware of the newly adopted code, the issues could have been solved under previously family transfer provisions. It seems appropriate that a letter of compliance can be issued on the basis that it complied and complies with the density of a family transfer. As staff mentioned, the property has been sold several times, and it was just recently discovered by our client that he doesn't have a legal lot of record. So he's been going through a lot of heartache for the past year and a half trying to determine what to do with the lot he has purchased, and he really would like to remodel. Both of the subject tracts that staff spoke about, they both currently have dwelling units on them. And that's all I have to add to staff's presentation, and I stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dalton.
excuse me, both properties, both have dwelling units on them, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Dalton. You'll stand by for questions, should we have some? This is a public hearing. Is there anybody from the public that would like to testify on this case? If so, please step forward. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and open up to the commission. Commissioners? Mr. Smith?
Mr. Chairman, it would help me to understand two things. One, what's the net effect of our approving this versus not approving it? And number two, a little more explanation as to what the rule around family transfers that has been referred to, that principle where you round up instead of rounding down. I'd just help me to understand both of those a little better.
Probably Mr. Alvarado can do the family transfer and
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez and Commissioner Smith. To answer your question, your first question first, effectively, we're legalizing this lot, so according to the applicant, they would like to do a remodel, and in the future, the lot could be sold as it currently is, but obviously you couldn't have another unit on there or anything like that. We're not raising the zoning or anything of that nature. It's just trying to allow the current owner to have a legal lot. You know, without a legal lot, he can't really do anything with his property, and it's hard to get financing, et cetera. As far as the family transfer ordinance, this is a special provision we have for subdivisions to make accommodations for families such as the ones Victoria mentioned, where they want to have a traditional split of their family lot to a child or grandchild. Therefore, the city allows for certain exceptions, including deferment of infrastructure improvements, and in this case also an increase in density. So typically our zoning density rounds down, so whatever your acreage times the zoning density equals 1.8, but you round down to 1 unit. However, under family transfer, it's rounded up, so you have 2 units. So that's how they could use this as a legal reason to allow for 2 units to come out of that lot split.
Commissioner Smith, are you done? Did that answer your question?
So, Madam, so the applicant went into, he purchased this property a couple years ago. He went into the city building permits and tried to obtain a permit, but without a permit. So he does want to remodel, but he's stuck in a situation where he can't do anything, and he can't sell this to someone else because he's just passing the problem along. So he does want to remodel. He cannot obtain a permit without a legal lot of record or a letter of compliance. So he's just kind of stuck there. So he can't make any kind of exterior or interior additions, remodels, unless he has a legal lot of record. So the property is developed. He's not going to develop it anymore, but he would like to remodel the existing residence. Thank you.
Commissioner Pava.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My impression looking at the aerials and the photographs and looking at the context is what's changed, what will change. So for kind of a rhetorical question, but I will ask it to you directly and frankly to staff. The facts on the ground are there's a house there now. There's going to be a house there afterwards. It has to still comply with regarding accessory dwelling units in the future, whatever. So what's changed and what will change on the ground? What will you see different besides if we went to the clerk's office and looked at this plan?
So Commissioner Pava, nothing will change, and I know that's a rhetorical question, but it is what it is. You see what you see. I'll let staff, I don't know what the rule would be with accessory dwelling units on this density, so if staff can address that, I can have them speak to that effect.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gutierrez and Commissioner Pava, or Chair Gutierrez, excuse me. Any sort of future accessory dwelling unit would have to meet all zoning regulations, so setbacks, parking, et cetera. So on such a small lot, it may or may not be possible, but you're right, it is a rhetorical question. Nothing's changing at this time, and I think staff agrees that it is kind of a silly conundrum to be denying somebody something that already exists and having a property owner stuck in a situation that's not feasible, but under our code, that's just how we've decided that we have to recommend this case. Thank you.
Thank you, and I fully understand where staff is deriving that recommendation from. I'm ready to make a motion.
Of course. Commissioner Lawrence, please.
Thank you. I believe that my question or questions are for staff. I am looking at the criteria here that are in our staff report, and I believe that one of the most relevant aspects is that the lot would otherwise comply with all other applicable standards of Chapter 14. I would assume that if we interpret the family transfer ordinance in such a way that it would then meet that criteria. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair Gutierrez and Commissioner Lawrence, that is correct. They would meet other criteria such as setbacks and lot coverage. Those are met.
And I also just want to confirm for the record that any other options to somehow make this a legal lot of record have been explored, that there are no other options that staff can see at this point in time.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Any other questions from the Commission? Commissioner Pava.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like the Commission to entertain a motion in the case of 2022-5065 101 Victoria Street Certificate of Compliance. The Planning Commission hereby recommends approval of the Certificate of Compliance for a lot that is non-compliant.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Faulkner?
Yes.
Commissioner Hinojosa? Yes. Commissioner Lawrence?
Yes.
Commissioner Pava?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. Moving on, case 2021-4379, Caja de Oro Subdivision Preliminary Development Plan. And Mr. Esquivel is the case planner.
Alex, how do you get the TVs on? Okay. Can everybody hear me? I've got a pretty heavy-duty mask on. This is Caja del Oro. It's case 2021-4379, Caja del Oro Subdivision Preliminary Development Plan. James Sieber and Associates, agent for Pulte Group of New Mexico. Applicant request approval of a development plan.
Mr. Esquivel, hold on. I think we're getting some noise from back there, so if you can speak up a little bit and if you can keep it down in the back. Thank you.
Request approval of a development plan for an 80 single-family home development plan The property is approximately 16.21 acres of land on 8 individual lots. And these are to be consolidated. The property is located at 1905, 1950, 00, and 1941 Caja de Oro Grant Road and 4, 5, and 7 Hernandez Roads. Obviously, these will have to go through a re-addressing through our GIS department, but for now, these are the designations. The second case is 2021-4381 Caja de Oro Subdivision, Preliminary Subdivision Plat. James Siebert and Associates, Inc., agent for Pulte Group of New Mexico applicant. They request approval of preliminary subdivision for 80 single-family lots in property description. On February 17, 2022, the Commission postponed case 2021-4379 and 2021-4381, the Caja de Oro Development Plan and Preliminary Plat, with the direction to the applicant to redesign the project. This project is now being resubmitted for the Commission's review. The applicant has provided some changes to the development plan and subdivision as a result of that request. Staff is recommending approval of case 2021-4379, subdivision preliminary development plan, and approval of case 2021-4381, preliminary subdivision plat, with the conditions of approval and technical corrections as listed in the staff report. Findings of fact, again, will be distributed at a later meeting. The applicant has made changes to the design that incorporate 10-foot setbacks on side yards for dwelling units, 24 feet in height. The redesign increased separation between homes between 10 and 20 feet. As you can see on figure 1 of the memo, you'll see the 5-foot setbacks and the 10-foot separation. And there are options that the applicant will go into as part of his presentation. The redesign of the subdivision did decrease density. The applicant did lose 8 lots, moving from 5.4 dwelling units per acre down to 4.9 dwelling units per acre as a consequence of the redesign. There is no change to the infrastructure design of the subdivision. There are only design changes to how the lots are being developed and the number of lots within the subdivision, internal circulation, both wet and dry utilities are all the same. They're coming in through Caja de Oro Road into both halves of the subdivision in order to support the infrastructure. The applicant is conforming and complying to the Santa Fe Homes program, and the applicant has met the approval criteria of 1438D1 for development plans and 1437C approval criteria for subdivision preliminary plat. And that will conclude the staff's presentation for this case. Ask them for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Escobar. James Siebert and Associates is presenting, so.
You swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
James Siebert, 915 Mercer Street. Nathan is setting up here. Let me do 2 things. One thing, I want to acknowledge Alex for helping us out on the audio-visual today. We wouldn't be here today without him. You always expect glitches, and sure enough, we had our share of them today. The other thing is to provide a little history to this. I know there's two new members on the commission, and where the project stands today. The previously at a previous planning commission meeting, the planning commission actually felt the density was appropriate for the area, and they recommended, you all recommended that it proceed to the City Council with a favorable recommendation for a general plan amendment and a rezoning. So what's in front of you tonight is just simply 2 issues. It's the preliminary development plan and the preliminary plat. So out of that meeting,
Well, let me go over, to keep going on some of the history so that everybody has a better background of this. Let me go through some of the slides. The first one is the aerial photo of the site. Actually, the 16.21 acre lot is what you're considering today, is part of a lot split. Lot splits are handled administratively. They're just simply provided to you as background information. Importance here, the south lot, which is 20.52 acres, there's been discussion about that there's a lot of residential development in the area. There's the recent apartment project that's been approved that's very nearby, and that there's no kind of commercial activities to help the neighbors out. And in discussions with a representative for the owner of the lot to the south, that lot will be reserved for kind of neighborhood commercial uses. The zoning on the property, as it stands today, is a combination of C2, which is general commercial, and R1. The R1 was increased to R10 by the commission and forwarded on to the city council, and the C2 was actually downzoned to R10 as well. So all these properties now are zoned, have been recommended for zoning to R10. Hopefully this will, there we go. So this is the plan as we're representing today, with certain changes to the plan, as there was recommendations provided by the Planning Commission that we'll talk about what those recommendations are. But to just clarify a few things, the roads in gray are public roadways. There's 2 points of access on each side of Cattle de Oro, one at the very north end, and it's also in gray, and then one at the very south end, noted as emergency access. All the roads inside the project are public roadways. It will be built as public roadways with curb, gutter, sidewalk, planting strips. In Cattle de Oro, the same thing will happen with Cattle de Oro. It will be improved. As presently it's a approximately 22-foot wide asphalt road, no curb and gutter, no sidewalk. It will be reconstructed along the section where the subdivision is taking place. And also we're adding right at the intersection of Cattle de Oro and Alameda, we're adding a right turn lane. And this improves the capacity of the intersection, allowing for right-hand turn movements and not blocking the other movements that are left-hand turns. The other thing that's taking place is that in red are the trail system associated with the development. And there's two types of trails. On the right-hand side and at the bottom, the trail section is meant for the subdivision itself, and it's has a total 10-foot width with a 5-foot area for planting and a 5-foot section for the trail itself. On the left-hand side, adjacent to Alameda, is an 8-foot trail. And we've had discussions with the Metropolitan Planning Organization on this to work with them. They actually requested that it become a public trail, and we're in agreement with that. We would have to, for 3 feet of that roadway, we would have to approach the Highway Department to agree to grant an easement for that, and we've agreed to work with the Highway Department to create that trail. let's get into some of the aspects of what happened at the prior meeting. And the prior meeting was on February 17th. We had a glitch there in May. The issue that came up was they felt the buildings were too close together. You know, each of these buildings is an equivalent of an attached duplex with a common wall. But on the side, on the previous plan, it was a 5-foot side yard. So what happens is you have a 10-foot separation of house to house. The Planning Commission felt that was insufficient. So what we did is we made the side yards 10 feet. And so what we now have is a 20-foot separation, house to house. And the result of that is that we went from 88 lots to 80 lots. So we lost 8 lots in that process. The other issue was pedestrian access. Before, the access took place at various locations between the units, and you had to walk through this path and then make a turn on the perimeter path and perhaps walk several lots down before you could get to whatever house you wanted to go to as a guest. The commission just didn't like that arrangement. So what we've done is now provided direct access from the interior parking to the unit. And we feel that it actually is, you're correct, it's a better solution. What I'm going to do is hand out some blow-ups of this. I think it's easier to see this in your hand than it is on a screen. But let's go from the bottom up. This is the trail on Alameda along the perimeter, and it would be, it's the next one up, it's the second one up, would be an 8-foot trail. We'd have to acquire 3 feet of additional land from the highway department to make it happen. But we would also retain a 5-foot planter area. And I'll show you the landscape plan. It's important that we retain this because it provides, in this case, it provides shade for people on the trail. Also, it begins to kind of soften the exterior of the development itself. The other to the bottom, going back to the bottom, would be the trails that we would have along the interior that would be more private in nature. We have a 5-foot planter strip and the 5-foot trail there. And they pretty much circumvent the entire project. The next, going to the very top, what takes place is we have 2 options, and we're a bit of a dilemma for which might be the best one, and thought we'd just present both to you and see if you all had a preference. But it can be what they call a double wall system, where you would both parties would enter into this walkway, and then they would split off to their individual houses. The advantage of this one is that it's more of a direct access to the trail system. And that's the disadvantage is that you do lose side yard space. And in this case, you end up with approximately 6.5 feet of side yard. The other solution is a single wall. And the advantage of the single wall is that you have more of a sense of space from your unit. You still end up with you have to have a sidewalk for getting into it. So your planter area kind of ends up being about, almost 6 feet. So we think that those are the two solutions, and then the plan itself shows you how the gates would work in this process. So the other issue is consideration of alleys. And the discussion was, well, why don't you put alleys along the back of the units, or along the perimeter of the units, and then the garages would face that alley. We think there's some problems with that, both from an aesthetic standpoint and a financial standpoint. From an aesthetic standpoint, as you would drive down Alameda or Caja de Oro, all you would see is nothing but garages. The other thing is, when you think about it, is that the typical process for approaching your house is to come off a public road and drive into your garage. So we feel that that's kind of a customary design feature, especially of these higher density units. The other thing is that to do the alleys, you have approximately 20 feet. And the reason for that of driving surface is that two cars have to be able to pass each other. The other thing that happens, in addition to that 20 feet, and this is from my experience, you have anywhere from 2 to 3 feet that you have to allow for grading to transition to the property line. So that's 23 feet. And then from the garage to the 20 feet, you have to inset the garage from that 20 feet in order to have adequate backup space. What happens is the lot then gets longer. And what the result of all this is that instead of losing 8 lots, because of the side yards, you're looking at losing significantly more. We didn't try to do a run on it, but I'll make you bet you'd be losing 20 to 30 units more. What happens is all your costs remain the same. Utility costs remain the same. Your road costs actually get more expensive because now you have alleyways. And what happens is the cost of the actual dwelling that cost has to be passed on somehow. And the price point at that point really puts that particular product out of the marketplace. You can't ask for the price that you would need in order to make the project work financially. So by including the alleys, what you've done is really made the property financially unfeasible. And I think we've addressed all the issues. I'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Siebert. This is a public hearing. Is there anybody here from the public that would like to testify on this case? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and open it up to the commission. Commissioners? Thank you, Commissioner Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to clarify a couple of things, and I think the one concern that I had last time was really about the pedestrian access, the pedestrian circulation. You touched on that a little bit. First, I did want to ask one specific question. You were talking about the trail layout along Alameda. You mentioned the trees, and I noted that you mentioned the shade, and I wanted to ask if you knew what you were planting there, if you had a landscaping plan in yet.
I had a landscape plan, and I'm not sure what happened to it. Hang on one second.
Okay, and maybe while you're looking that up, I can ask another question, or if you want to look that up first, you can.
Yeah, let's see if we can find that.
Okay.
Here we go. Yeah, full screen. So here's the deal.
Mr. Siebert, excuse me for 1 second. Mr. Escobar or somebody, can we move this so Commissioner Faulkner has a better view? Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Siebert.
So the trees, and there's a variety of types, and that's actually a requirement of the city. They don't want a consistent, the same genus and species for every tree out there, because if something happens to them, then they all die. So there is a variety of trees, but the idea is that we would have the entire perimeter of the property planted. The idea is to kind of soften the appearance of the project itself. I mean, at one point, that's about all you're going to see is trees.
And do you know what type of tree will be along Alameda?
Well, I can. Make that bigger. Oh, I've done it now. Here we go. Yeah. I think I can read it. Let's do this. Their audio-visual skills are not perfected at this point. Let me tell you, the trees that have been spec'd by the landscape architect, there's both deciduous and evergreen. The deciduous are sensation box elder maple, Russian hawthorn, Buckley oak, and emerald sunshine elm.
Thank you. And at the top of that screen, it says street tree, and then it lists a few. Is that what will be along the most public path?
Well, let me see that.
Right? Oh, no, you passed it. Oh.
Yeah.
The tall trees is what those are, which was really what I was looking for, to make sure that
They
they were actually
would
trees that would
be-
provide shade.
It would be principally Buckley oak.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask about, the last time we saw this project, as I recall, the lots were generally intended, I believe, to face towards the trail. And I believe that we talked about those would be sort of the front doors, including along the trail access. Is that still the case? Is that still what you're intending here?
It would be, yes.
Okay.
In this rearranged pedestrian access, you would go through the gate, you would walk to the side, and actually it's a side entry on the front. It's a covered porch, and you would enter from the front, yes.
Okay, so the idea more than anything is that what would be facing Cajal del Oro, what would be facing Alameda, those would appear to be the fronts of homes, and then from your interior streets, you would have garage access, and would you have a door access on that side too, or is it just?
No, you would not have a pedestrian access from the front, from the street. You know, obviously the owner would enter through the garage, but a guest, and part of the development plan shows that there would be a doorbell that you would ring to activate to be able to enter the gate.
From the trail side, so you would walk around to the trail side and then enter through the gate.
Well, it would be from
there?
two sides, actually. It would be from the public road. There would be a gate, and there would be also a gate from the front side off Alameda.
When you say there's a gate from the public road, can you point out on your on one of your diagrams, any of them, where that would be? I'm just trying to envision how we have the parking, and you have some parking areas along the street, and you have homes and garages, but then there are gates too.
Yeah, this may be a little hard for you to see, but where it says here, gate with activation button, that would be from the public street.
Oh, I see. So people would park in a parking space if they were coming to visit someone, bring their person they're visiting, and walk all the way through and around when they're let in through the gate. Okay, thank you. And otherwise, what you have marked as trail, except for what is already running along the street, that is not accessible by the public in any way?
What you have is you have a sidewalk adjacent to, part of the public street. All that's public.
So, yes, so along Alameda, along Caja del Oro, that, in theory, I could go and walk along what you build as the trail, as the sidewalk.
Correct.
But if I wanted to walk along the back side of this complex, then I would not be able to do that as a public pedestrian.
Yes, Kevin Patton,
Mr. Patton, if you want to come up and be sworn in.
You swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Kevin Patton, Director of Land Planning and Settlements for the Pulte Group, 7601 Jefferson Street, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 87109. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, may I approach the bigger screen and maybe point to you? Thank you.
And if you get the microphone.
Thank you. So we had provided two options. This is the sidewalk that surrounds the roadway, the vehicular roadway here. We provided two options where we have, and this could be a public easement for anyone in the public to use that goes from the public street, from the public sidewalk, through the units, all the way to the public trail here. We had suggested maybe a gate, even if this was so it doesn't necessarily, we can exclude the gate. We thought about this as an option, having a gate here, but there could be that the residents could put a gate here. So if you're here and you're parked, and whether you're a guest or whether you're just the public and walking through here, you could walk along the sidewalk, walk out here, and go here. And this would be, let's say, option A, and this would be between every unit. This was option B, but we would have this between every unit. So, excuse me, that option would be available for anyone. So that's one option.
Thank you. What I'm referring to, though, is really what is along the upper left-hand corner, that part of the trail, and how that access works.
Right. So again, if we didn't have this gate, this is optional. If you're the public and you're walking here and you wanted to go into the internal, you would just turn and walk through there. There's nothing that would prevent you. We do have, so this is the front door, but this is a sliding door here in their patio that's just open to this landscaped area. So they could, you have two options. We chose to put it at the front door rather than maybe at a sliding door to the patio. But the resident themselves has access here as well as here to the front door as well as to the garage.
And say one of those residents or a neighbor wants to cut the corner of Alameda and Caja del Rio and walk along the edge of this neighborhood. If they did so, they could do so, and they would look at what is essentially the fronts of these homes.
That's correct.
That's the right understanding?
That is correct. And so the other option is if we didn't have the walls between here with this public, this one doesn't have as much public access. That's why we wanted to propose this, that anybody could go through here. The other option was you put a single wall on the property line, and then you would have a gate. This actually is on their property, in their courtyard, which would take, you would come off the sidewalk, up the driveway through here, all the way up here, and then they'd have an opening that doesn't show the opening here, where they would have this on both. This one shows this, where you come off of here, in here, here, and this actually then accesses the front. That's not necessarily pedestrian friendly for all the public. That's why we want to give you guys that option on which one you felt was better.
Thank you. That helps. And I think my concern really last time was for the people who live here. Currently, it doesn't have great connectivity to other areas of the community. I wanted to make sure that there was circulation throughout. You have the small park there as well. Want to make sure that people can access that too. And so I think your answers help me. I have nothing else at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I agree with you. I thought you had good comments last time. Hopefully these address some of those.
Mr. Patton, since you're up there and with the microphone, I have a quick question for you.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, as we're looking at this, at Section AA and Section BB is the two choices that you're showing us on this drawing and right here. And the one without gates and that provides connectivity is going to come with a 5-foot sidewalk. That's correct?
Yes, sir.
And the other one would just be a 4-foot sidewalk and in their courtyard.
Correct, because one is per unit and the other one is kind of a shared. This one would be shared between two units and then it breaks off, where this was internal to the courtyard itself.
Thank you. Commissioner Faulkner. You good? Commissioner Pava.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, still on this topic of the passageway alternatives. The walkways, although they're we'll call it option A, which is the lower one. Yes, one you're pointing to. In that case, there are no access gates, and people who live in the subdivision, as well as members of the public, can walk directly through, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then, thank you, and then the walkway is split. The walkway is actually private property, isn't it?
That is correct. So this would have to be a public easement, which we've done on an HOA property, but yes, sir.
Yeah, and so that's, I guess, my next question would have been that you're predicting is somewhere in the covenants and in the plating, this will show as private property, but a public walkway easement, and that's the mechanism you'll use.
Yes, sir. In fact, that would be on the final plat that would come before this board at a later date. You'd see that public access.
And I do recall the voluminous covenants proposed for this, and I imagine in there it'd be very clear that nobody's going to be blocking off these accessways, even though they consider them walkways to their back front door.
Commissioner, that is true, and we'd have an HOA, a property manager, that would help enforce that. And so it wouldn't be just necessarily that the city would have to come out. If the city saw something, they could reach out to the HOA property manager and say, hey, and this would be enforced, so you'd have somebody out here all the time looking at that, as well as weeds and other things.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I just for the record, I realize it's difficult when you're dealing with higher, medium density residential in these common wall homes that are fee simple, that there have to be design solutions, and that's why I wanted to know more about those nuances. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pava. Any other commissioners? Okay, so just my 2 cents on and same as Commissioner Pava, I think. I don't know if it's something that we need to condition. Mr. Patton, you seem happy to make sure that it's noted that there's not going to be any restrictions and no gates put up by Pulte or homeowners for that. So with that, I'll take a motion.
I would motion, if I could. I'll have to look at the case one moment, or the agenda. Thank you. I would motion for approval of case 2021-4379, subdivision preliminary development plan, and approval of case 2021-4381, preliminary subdivision plat, with the conditions of approval and technical corrections listed in the staff report.
Second amendment, being the motion.
Thank you. We can have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Faulkner?
Yes.
Commissioner Hinojosa? Commissioner Lawrence?
Yes.
Commissioner Pava?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith? The motion has been approved.
Thank you. So Boylan Circle's postponed, Old Pecos Trail is postponed. We will be moving on to case 2022-4942, 2339 Botolf Road rezoning. Liaison Planning Services of the agent, and Dan Escobar is the case manager. Mr. Escobar. We'll get to you, Counselor. Let Mr. Escobar do his presentation, and then we'll get to you. Do me a favor, go to the microphone, be sworn in, get your point of order over to Ms. Fagali, and we'll have her advise us. Thank you.
I'll need you to speak in the microphone, please. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Stephen Farber, F-A-R-B-E-R. I am a lawyer licensed to practice law in the state of New Mexico. I live at 2351 Botolf Road. I make a point of order that the opponents to this particular rezoning have not been given proper due process of law prior to this moment, and that the public comment bubble was closed on Monday, and people were not able to make public comments. The city code particularly states that when a deadline falls on a holiday, that you have until the next day in order to be able to do whatever you need to do. That's been my experience practicing law for more than 4 decades. It's the city code, it's the city law, so people, including me, have not been able to provide information. One of the things we wanted to provide...
Counselor, did you try and upload something to PrimeGov and were rejected?
At 8 o'clock at night, yes, the bubble was not there Monday night.
Okay. Mr. Galley, do you have a section of the code you're referencing?
Yes, I sent an email message, which I made a copy, printed out. I didn't bring it up with me. I sent it to, I believe, the city attorney, the city manager, Mr. Escobar should have it, and others as well. So we've been precluded from being able to provide information. I wanted to be able to share with the Planning Commission that there's Exhibit A, which is item number 2 there.
Let me get input from Ms. Fagali regarding, let's not get into what you wanted to.
I can give you that code provision. And
I think if you emailed it, she may have it, and I want her to look at it and advise us as a commission to her opinion on it, and we'll move forward from there. So if you give me.
And I have a couple other points that I'd like. Sorry to.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the section that this gentleman's referring to is 14-1.9D, computation of time, which is for general rules of construction. We did look at that. It does say that there is, the time required is, if the deadline or required date of action falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday observed by the city, deadline of required date of action is the next day. That is not one of those days. References to days or calendar days unless otherwise stated. This section is referring to the Chapter 14 as a whole, which is mostly in reference to dates for appeals, filings, ENN notices, those sorts of dates. The date for comments on PrimeGov is stated specifically in the agenda, which was Monday at 5. It was not affected by the holiday. PrimeGov was open until Monday at 5 p.m., exactly as it said on the agenda. Mr. Farber did make several comments through PrimeGov, so we felt that he was adequately aware of how to do so and was able to use that platform. It was our interpretation, the city attorney's office, that this particular section, ordinance in the code, is not applicable to PrimeGov comments because they have a specific date which was not affected by the holiday. There was nothing that needed to come in person. There was no reason why that date would not be usable.
There is nothing in the code.
Mr. Farber.
Excuse me, thank you, Chair. Good to be at us. There is nothing in the code.
Mr. Farber, please. Ms. Fagali, so in the city attorneys recommending we can carry on with this case because Prime Glove was open and the reference he's referencing is different than what we're going to be hearing tonight. It's for appeals and things of that nature.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
There's nothing in that code provision that limits this to only ENNs or any other submissions. It is a general provision that says that when a deadline falls on a holiday, you have until the next day. That is common practice. If Ms. Powell were here, she'd say, yes, that's the way the law works. The other thing is that...
Counselor, let me just stop you. With the advice of the city attorney's office, I'm going to poll the commission. I feel confident that we can go forward with this case, but I'm going to poll the commission and see how they feel about it, and we will go from there. Commissioners, does anybody object for Commissioner? Okay, Commissioner Faulkner, please.
So is there any,
If not, just bring it closer.
is there any precedent of this section of the code being used for cases like this outside of Prime Gov?
Is that to me?
No, it's the city attorney, Mr. Barber.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Faulkner, not that I am aware of, no.
Does anyone with institutional knowledge remember it being used in this capacity?
There are several Mondays that are holidays in the city, and to my knowledge, the deadline on Prime Gov has never been changed, and no one has ever questioned it.
Well, the fact that no one has ever challenged it before...
Mr. Farber, please. Let the commissioner finish her question and Ms. McGalley finish her answer. I will get back with you.
I apologize. I thought they
Thank you.
were finished.
You're good. Okay.
The other point of order that I have...
Hold on, I'm still polling the commissioners. I will get to you, Mr. Farber, but let's take this one step at a time.
Could you turn your mic on, please, Commissioner?
May I ask a question of the witness before we proceed?
Will it,
I need to.
will it help you decipher?
Yes, it would.
If that's the case, please.
All right, sir. So if I understand your objection, you were unable to present all of the information. Is that correct?
That is correct. I wanted to bring to the attention of the commissioners Exhibit A, which is item number 2, which is apparently findings of fact from the month before that reaches the exact opposite conclusion from what the staff is going to try and present to you today, and I would have written something up. There's no ability to be able to upload anything, and so I'm stymied because it's a quasi-judicial proceeding. I can't communicate with you, and so we're stuck. Plus, I was never advised by the Land Use Commission, as the technicians in the back told me I should have been, that I needed an HDI cable and an HDI port to be able to show you things on the screen.
Okay, Councilor.
Totally unfair process.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the commission? Okay, it's my recommendation on the city attorney's office that we can proceed. We will proceed, Mr. Farber. There will be avenues if you don't like what's happened here tonight for you to take, and I'm sure you're well aware of all of them. So with all due respect, if you'll have a seat and Liaison Tani have a seat, everybody, let Mr. Esquivel get to his portion, then we'll call up the planner, and then we'll go to the public hearing of the portion. Thank you.
Just ask how much time will be allocated for us to be able to present to you our concerns about this particular case.
I'll get back with you when you come up, okay? Thank you. Mr. Esquivel, please speak loud so we can hear you.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is case number 224942, 2339 Botolf Road, rezoning, Liaison Planning Service, Inc., agent for Shelley Espinosa, owner, requested rezoning for Chapter 14 SFCC 1987, 1435 rezonings from R1 residential 1 dwelling unit per acre to R2 2 dwelling units per acre on 1.41 acre lot. The property is located within the Suburban Archaeological Review District. Planning Commission should recommend the governing body approve case 224942. Only one motion is required tonight. Approve or deny case 2022-4942, request for rezoning of approximately plus minus 41 acres. The findings of fact and conclusions of law will be presented at a next Planning Commission meeting. The applicant has complied with subsection 1431E, pre-application conferences, 1431F, early neighborhood notification procedures, and 1431H, notice requirements. I started this actual review by going back to the 1981 zoning ordinance, or zoning map. This is a picture of that zoning map. It identified the area as it was back in 1981 prior to many of the annexations within the area, just identifying how far back I did look at this application. The circle is the area, the blow-up is what we're looking at, and the blue is the approximate site location. There was an error that I found in the previous zoning map. The circle on the zoning map, the red circle, identifies where that error is, and that is the R1 for the annexation that I identified for 2009 here. As you can see, the city identified that property as being in the city at the time in 1981, and then in 2009 the annexation occurred, bringing that piece of property in, but that is the only error that I found. The property was annexed in 2009. The Exhibit E3 in your memo or in your packet will identify the dates that I found within our ArcGIS map, identifying when many of the annexations occurred within that area. As you can note, in 2002, the property just north of this property was annexed in 2002, and the property in 2009 where I identified as site was the 2009 annexation. The property is located within a future land use map identified as very low residential, which carries a density of 1 to 3 dwelling units per acre. As you can see, it covers the majority of that area in terms of the future land use map. The area that I actually reviewed was the area from St. Michael's Drive to Rodeo Road and from St. Francis Drive to Old Pecos Trail. I found this to be a very compact area, easy to look at because of the road network. So this is the area that I looked at that I felt was part of the area in question. The review area identified after calculating using our ArcGIS a density of approximately 2.4 acres for that area. That takes into accommodation all of the subdivisions that I found and the apartment complexes along St. Francis Drive, and I guess that would be where the St. Michael's area is. So 2.4 was the density calculations that I found as the average density across the board for that area, not including the non-residential districts. The immediate zoning for the area, I found the R2 and mostly R1. And as you can see, this map identifies all of the zoning changes that have occurred from 1981 to the most recent, which was a subdivision that occurred just up from Botolf Road. I believe that was in 2009, I think, or if I can find it, 2006. This is a comparison between the 1981 map for the rezonings and what's occurred to date. So as you can see, this is a period of over 40 years. So it isn't something that I would consider a trend, but things that have happened over time. And this identified that that comparative analysis that I thought the Planning Commission would like to see just to identify what's been going on for this area. The property is vacant. There is the Arroyo de los Chamisos that is north of the property. There's no floodway on the property. There is a part of a flood zone that is on the property, and there's an access easement to just south of the property, crossing the property to access the property east of the lot. This is a larger picture of 2339 so that you can identify where the flood zone is and where that access road is to the property to the east. And it is pretty much vacant. I wanted to go over density a little bit, and I know that Commissioner Smith asked this question briefly at a previous case earlier, and I wanted to go a little bit more into how we calculate density so that everybody understands what this means from going from an R1 to an R2. Currently, the property is zoned R1, and we use, when there is available water and there's available sewer, city water and city sewer, we're going to go to 14.7.2b for our calculations of density. If there are no city services, then the zoning or the density is just calculated at 0.4 dwelling units per acre instead of the zone density. So instead of going for R1, everything would be calculated at 0.4. This property will be accessing city services for water and sewer, so that would not apply. If they only had one service available, then this would give them a density where we would calculate for 1 dwelling unit per acre. So this would work for an R1 district, but it wouldn't do anything for an R2 district. And there's also an area requirement if they have no utilities, which gives a required area per dwelling unit of 2.5 acres per dwelling unit. 14.7.2b is the calculation allowable for dwelling units that will apply to this. And what we do is we take the total density or the total acreage to 2 decimal places taken from a survey done from a licensed surveyor, and we subtract the floodway being the channel of the arroyo. This property does not have a channel. And that would give us the first value. If this were in, then we would multiply that balance by the density factor. So in this case, if they have 1.4 acres, we would multiply this times 1. They're going to get a density of 1.41. That gives them a value that we would use where you would drop, and then from there we would calculate the mountainous and difficult terrain. If they're not in the mountainous difficult terrain, then that becomes their density factor, 1.41, which the decimal place would fall off as required by number 6, and we would keep the whole number. So the density for this particular lot for an R1 district existing right now is 1 dwelling unit per acre. This is a little bit more of the formula that I can show you, where I provided the existing R1 density. They have 1.4 acres. There's 0 floodway. The density is 1. There's no mountainous and difficult terrain, so the density is 1.4. And this would give them that 1 dwelling unit. Okay. For the proposed request, their request is going from an R1 to an R2. If successful by this committee and the governing body, this acreage stays the same, 1.41. However, the density calculation changes from 1 to 2. And this would give them a density of 2.8. 0.8 falls off. That gives them a density value of 2. The 2 lots are going to either be, there are 2 options. The existing lot will allow a house and a guest house, and that's it. So for R1, that's what their density allows, 1 house, 1 guest house. For an R2, they would be allowed either 2 lots or 2 dwelling units on 1 lot. If it's 1 lot, they're allowed 1 guest house. If it's 2 lots, they're allowed 1 house and 1 guest house on each. So those are the differences between what the value the applicant gets from a rezoning from R1 to R2. We found that the applicant did meet all of the requirements for rezoning. A general plan amendment is not a requirement when you're expanding an existing zone district to incorporate your particular property. Normally, there is a requirement. If you're doing a rezoning and you have less than 2 acres, you don't qualify. However, that does not work, and it is allowed if you're expanding an adjacent zone district to incorporate into yours. And because this falls within the future land use map between 1 and 3 dwelling units an acre, it is an allowable change for zoning, so they have to meet only the zoning criteria. And our belief is that they've met all of the zoning criteria in order to move forward with a positive response from staff. Now, this application has been tabled or postponed a few times. That's because the applicant has made changes to their application in order to achieve this state that is before the Planning Commission today. So as Mr. Farber indicated, he has been sending a lot of requests in for a lot of documentation. You may have captured a previous report where I did recommend that they did not meet the criteria. However, they do meet the criteria tonight, and depending on the outcome of the Planning Commission will determine what the findings will be at the future meeting. With that, I can stand for any questions. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Escobar. For Mr. Escobar, questions? Commissioner Ball.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Esquivel. Would you address the arguments filed by Mr. Farber that some of the information that he wants to be bringing before the commission, in fact, has not been provided to us? Is that correct or not?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Commissioner Quinones Falls, the information that is allowed that I'm aware of, I placed in the packet material as I got it until I built the packet. If somebody provided me information after the packet, that individual has a second option. I did receive a letter from Tianos, Mr. Tianos, that many people requested to get in the packet. However, that packet was already developed and packaged and processed, so it did not get in the packet. I responded to the applicant, those that requested, that they have 2 more options. They can include those comments into our PrimeGov as comments, or they can present their comments individually at the Planning Commission. So there are 3 options available for people to provide comments. 1, they can provide it to me, and I will place them in the packet, as I have done in your exhibits. You'll see an exhibit in there for correspondence. 2, they have the option within the deadline, that window of opportunity, to provide comments while the PrimeGov is open for comments. Or 3, they can present personally to this Planning Commission. So there are 3 opportunities for individuals to provide comments to this body.
So in fact, they could have provided something like Siebert's company provided, additional documentation to hand out to the commissioners now. Do they advise that they could do that?
That is correct.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Councilor Neosvald, the information that they provided for the previous case was in the packet. Just to be clear, what you were handed,
This is just
by
an
paper is in the
amplification.
packet. Exactly. It's just, yeah. Thank you.
All right. All right, thank you. That was my question.
Thank you, Mr. Escobar. Any other, Mr. Escobar? We'll get back to you, I'm sure. Liaison Planning Services?
You swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Dolores V. Hill. I'm with Liaison Planning Services, P.O. Box 1835, Santa Fe, New Mexico, 87504. I'd like to start by handing out some letters of support to all the commissioners and to the attorneys for the record, if I may.
Ms. Vihil, Ms. Vihil, I asked that we didn't get anything handed out. Were these things that were included in our packet? Mr. Gully?
They should have been provided ahead of time if they were going to be provided in writing here.
Well, in the past, we've handed out information to the Planning Commission, so I wasn't aware that it had to be handed out at a certain time.
They would, there's clearly not time to review it at this point. How much information is?
This is one of them. There's like three in each.
I don't object to you putting it for the record, but it should have been included in our packet, and I'm going to ask that, because it is a distraction at the last minute, unless I'm doing something unlawful, that you do not hand those out, okay? Thank you.
Okay? May I?
No, just
Okay.
further, hand them to Melissa for the record.
Thank you. I can't read with my glasses, but I have to use them to see you. I do the opposite here. Anyway, good evening. Good to see everybody. You know, it's been a long haul with this pandemic, and it's nice to see everyone in person and alive and well. As you know, my name is Dolores Vihil. I'm with Liaison Planning Services. I represent the applicant, Shelley Espinosa. She is here in the audience, and she would like to she has a statement that she'd like to read in after I do my presentation. Actually, she wants to read it into the record after everyone else presents, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to thank Dan Esquivel for an excellent job in reviewing this case. I know it was complicated, but I think he did a thorough job in making all the correct information available to you all so that you can make a good judgment on how you want to proceed with this request from an R1 to an R2 zoning. We did have an ENN meeting January 5th, 2022, and where we discussed the application. With the neighbors. There was maybe, I don't know, 7 to 10 neighbors. We did a Zoom application. We were working, at that time, we were working with a different staff member, Donna Wynett. She was at that meeting. We did provide you with the notes and the comments that we received at that meeting. She did and work with the city attorney in making sure that we followed all the correct procedures to move forward and present to you tonight. As Dan mentioned, we did work on the requirements for the rezoning criteria, and we provided the information for him so that he can recommend approval for this case. We've also provided all the information that's required for this. I understand that a site plan is not part of this application, but I have one for your review if you need to, and if you want to discuss it in detail. It's available. I don't know. It's up to you, Mr. Chair, or any of the commissioners if they want to look at it. That's really all I have right now. I think it's time to just get into it, and if you would allow the applicant to be the last speaker. And thank you for your time. I open up for questions.
Mr. Hill, if you don't mind, have her, because if she's come up and go ahead and read into the record and get sworn in, if we should have any questions for you going on, you're ready to go. So if you don't mind doing that now.
You swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Shelley Espinosa. My address is 27 Coyote Pass, Santa Fe, New Mexico, 87508.
yeah, if you'll do that now and hand a copy to
Okay,
Melissa so she can.
I wasn't sure. Alrighty. As I just said, good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners and fellow Santa Fe neighbors. My name is Shelley Espinoza, and I'd like to begin by telling a little bit about myself and my family. I was born to a large family with roots here in New Mexico dating back to the 1600s. My mother's family arrived in Santa Fe in the late 1700s. My mother loved Santa Fe and loved our family's generational legacy that is part of Santa Fe's history today. It was important to her, and it was important to her to instill that love and respect in her children. My mother told countless stories about Santa Fe and our family history as I was growing up. I would like to relate them to you, but I think it would suffice to say that I'm proud to say that I'm a 10th generation Santa Fean. My family and I have been blessed to be part of Santa Fe's history. I have kept my family traditions alive and have instilled in my family the same love and respect for Santa Fe that was passed on to me. I worked the majority of my 25-year career in Santa Fe near the Plaza for the Supreme Court, Public Education, and the Department of Finance. During those 25 years, I raised my 3 children, attending grade school, middle school, high school, Santa Fe Community College. Then they went on to UNM and Highlands. I also graduated and earned my bachelor's degree from the College of Santa Fe during that time period. It took blood, sweat, and tears to come to the point that I am now. Almost 4 years ago, just before I retired, as my retirement dream, I purchased this piece of property using my life savings. I plan to build a home and live a comfortable, peaceful life in my retirement in the town that I dearly love. Additionally, my hope is to share this property with my family one day, especially as I grow older, and leave a legacy for them. That's our tradition. Currently, none of my children live in Santa Fe. My eldest son holds a master's degree and works for state government here in Santa Fe, yet he has to commute daily from Albuquerque, as housing in Santa Fe is too expensive for he and his family. My daughter is working on her degree at UNM, and I would love for her and her family to live closer to me and be able to work and live in Santa Fe. My youngest son attended Highlands. He currently shares a house with roommates. Again, Santa Fe is too expensive for him. Rezoning and eventually splitting this lot would allow me to help at least one of my children to live and work in Santa Fe. It would be a shame if I was not able to continue my Santa Fe legacy and traditions with my family, and like many Santa Fe natives, be pushed out. My property is 1.4 acre. I would like to rezone it from R1 to R2 and split my lot into 2. Those 2 lots would be more or less 0.70 acre, almost 3/4 of an acre each. It has been difficult to understand the objection from certain neighbors who say, "Not in my neighborhood," and that my family should not be allowed to live and have their homes in this neighborhood because they want to keep their neighborhood intact and preserve their little piece of Santa Fe. What about my heritage and the ability for my family to live and prosper in this city? Of my answers also. If not for my family, then for whose? I love my family. I love Santa Fe. I love tradition and my heritage. I love that Botolf Road has a mixture of properties from office buildings to the far north end to condo complexes, St. Mike's athletic fields, big lots, small lots, variety of homes, down to my neighbor's teepee, yurt, and greenhouses, all adding unique character to this area. I never imagined that my dream would be met with such resistance, nor did I anticipate the aggression I have experienced from a few neighbors who most are not my adjacent neighbors and cannot see my property from their houses. I have concluded that these folks just don't like the idea of my family living in their neighborhood. This began during the ENN process. I understand the need for this process. However, I never imagined that this process sets up a situation where a few people feel that they can handpick and choose who can and can't live in their neighborhood, or who can and can't prosper or benefit from developing their property. During the ENN meeting, I felt harassed, intimidated, and attacked by Mr. Farber and the Nobles. I was asked disturbing and inappropriate questions with such disregard to my human dignity, such as, who is going to live on your property? Mr. Farber and the Nobles were argumentative with Ms. Behill over whether my mother or my children would be living on the property. Several times they made statements to Ms. Behill such as, you said Ms. Espinosa's mother would be living on the property, nothing about her children. Another statement by Mr. Farber said was, how will we know who she will sell it to? There was an attempt to strong-arm me into adding covenants to my property, giving up my rights, which would prevent my family from building in the future. Mr. Farber drew an arbitrary line using the Rio Chamiso as his delineation as to where progress should stop on Botolf Road, thereby segregating and singling out only my piece of property. Yet just 2 years ago, my neighbors to the north, the DiGiannis, were approved to rezone and subdivide their property into 4 lots to build spec homes to sell. It's my understanding that neither the Nobles, Mr. Farber, or any of the people that have written opposition letters for my request, or those making presentations today, directly oppose that project, and I doubt they asked who was going to live in those houses and who they were going to be sold to. Additionally, I'm confused as to why the Nobles are objecting to this rezoning, because they own numerous high-density properties in this neighborhood, some only 700 feet from my property, including a 6-unit apartment compound, along with two more very small lots reserved for development, which allows for primary dwellings and accessory dwellings. One of those lots is currently for sale. Why is it that they can prosper and be free to do what they please with their property and prospering tremendously? In my opinion, picking and choosing who can live, prosper, and benefit from property in this neighborhood and who cannot. There's been some question about me allowing people to walk through my property and giving access and easement for the general public to walk through my property. When I purchased this property, my neighbors, the Rubensteins and Tianos, and I agreed contractually to prohibit people from going through our properties. Both the Rubensteins and Tianos have put up fences to prevent trespassers from accessing their property. Mr. Tiano told me he had people camping on his property and relieving themselves on this property, Mrs. Rubenstein told me that she had people roaming around her house, trying to open her doors and getting into her shed. As for my property, weekly, I pick up empty alcohol containers and trash. Mr. Tiano told me he's run people off my property because they were partying and drinking, and this has become a dangerous situation, not to mention taking the risk and liability for these trespassers. In conclusion, I'm not asking for preferential treatment. I'm only asking for equal opportunity to live, prosper, and to make a better life and livelihood, just as others have in this neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Espinoza. If you'll leave a copy with Melissa. This is a public hearing. Please line up if members of the public, if you want to be heard during this case.
There's a computer here.
Daniel, is this your computer?
So, 1 second, Mr. Farber, please. Anybody else from the public? Melissa, can we do a swearing in of everybody and then they can give their name and address when they come up?
Excuse me? Are you all going to be speaking? Are you all going to be speaking? Okay, please raise your right hands. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimonies you're about to give are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. And when you step to the microphone, please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Stephen Farber again, if I may raise some legal objections first, and then I'd like to be able to have an idea how much time you're going to allocate, so I know what I can say, what I can't say, what I can refer to. There are other people who want to speak, and let me just say, no one has any objection to Ms. Espinosa or to her living on that property, period. I was a city councilor from 1992 to 1996, and anyone can look at the records and the minutes. I was a civic activist arguing on behalf of the local residents, of people who are here for neighborhood preservation. I cared about the south side, I cared about the east side, I cared about the west side, and I cared about the north side. So there is absolutely no credence, none whatsoever, that I personally would ever oppose someone living on a piece of property. There is a much bigger issue that's involved that has gotten distorted, and I'd like to go back to that. Now, we were not told, number one, that there had been an amendment to the zoning application. That is a violation of the city code. If that happened in the
Mr.
last...
Chair, point of order.
Mr. Faulkner.
Could we identify for the public comment section how long they have to speak so that they know what to speak about and how to do so?
Counselor, so I'm not going to give you a time limit. I'm going to ask that you don't be redundant.
Okay.
I'm going to ask that you stick to points of the case that involve the commission and don't get off into the weeds into legal aspects that do not involve this commission. If there's something that you know is happening somewhere else, and if you would just be precise, since there is other people that want to speak after you, so we can listen to everybody. Thank you.
And thank you, Chair. Some of those comments, though, I did take personally. We have nothing against Ms. Espinosa. She's perfectly free to build a house and a guest house on that lot of land, which is zoned R1. The issue is that she's seeking to extend the density to an R2 based upon an adjustment of land that was made in 2002, 20 years ago. There's been no change in this particular area, and Mr. Escobel's review going all the way to St. Michael's Drive through Botolf is totally inappropriate and gives an advanced density when, in fact, the area should be the Arroyo de los Chamisos, which has been a dividing line of the Sully Lomas area to the south all the way to I-25. And no one has mentioned, and I want to mention because I think that it is crucial, the Santa Fe Home Rule Charter is our governing document. The Santa Fe Home Rule Charter, which I included the portion of Section 2.04 in the submission that I made, which is a part of your exhibit number 8, F8, I believe is what it is, with the letters, not saying that these are letters in opposition, says that a crucial component of the governance of the city of Santa Fe, which transcends all the city code, is cultural and neighborhood preservation. We added the word neighborhood. I was on the Charter Review Commission. Chair Gutierrez, you were on it as well. We added the word neighborhood 4 times into Section 2.04. So that is where everything starts. The analogy very quickly is the Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land. Everything flows from that. For Santa Fe as a home rule charter city, the home rule charter is our Constitution, and everything flows from the home rule charter. That's why we have a full-time mayor now. Well, the neighborhood preservation paragraph, which everybody omits from the city standpoint in the land use department, talks about the need to preserve cultural integrity and neighborhood preservation. This property is adjacent and nearby to the Silly Lomas and Arroyo Chamizo neighborhoods. That's why it's so important. This is one of the few semi-rural areas that exist within the city of Santa Fe. And for people to disregard the home rule charter is beyond me, to be quite candid, because that is our governing document. And in the materials under F, which was nowhere noted, I submitted a 50-page document of a review. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to review my entire compilation, but I thought it is accurate. It sets forth the history, it sets forth the guiding principles, and it sets forth the issues and why people are concerned to be here today. And particularly, I'd like to, I don't know if who hands this out, hand exhibit A, which was exhibit number 2, and this is what I was talking about. For the bubble comment, I thought it said findings of fact. I thought it was going to be a recitation of the findings of fact from the Planning Commission final report. But when I looked at it, I saw that it was the exact opposite. 1 month ago, the City Land Use Department apparently prepared a report recommending that this Planning Commission oppose the rezoning. So since that time, and based on what I'm hearing today, there's been communications between the applicant, the applicant's planner, or applicant and or the applicant's planner, and the Land Use Department. That amendment or modification to the zoning application was never shared with anybody who opposes this project. I didn't get it. They knew I was concerned about it, and I'm not here as a lawyer. I'm here as a concerned Santa Fean. Now, I have not been here for 10 generations. I appreciate the history. I cherish the history. I love this town. That's why I gave so much to it when I was raising little children, when I served on the city council at the same time, when I tried to maintain my law practice at the same time. So I have a love for this town. I have a love for the culture, and I have a love for the community. But I also have a strong allegiance to the law, and I have a strong allegiance to rules and regulations, and that they should be followed, and that due process of law should not be denied to anybody. And it has been denied to us, because if, in fact, the application for rezoning got amended sometime between May 5th and now, or maybe the end of April and May, and now, it should, as a matter of law and of courtesy, been provided to the people who at least attended the ENN, or certainly to people who made their concerns about this proposed rezoning made known to the Land Use Department, and that was not done. So Exhibit A, which, may I approach?
I don't want...
It's in the packet.
Okay, hand it to Melissa, and it's Exhibit A in our packets. How's it marked in our packet? Do you know?
It is.
Okay.
I highlighted certain parts where it shows that it's a direct flip-flop from what is being said today versus what the Land Use Department was proposing for May the 5th. And I've had requests under the Inspection of Public Records Act for reports, for drafts, for plans, all of which have been delayed until mid-June, even though they're available and should have been given to me. It caused me to have to file a lawsuit against the city of Santa Fe, and I filed the amended complaint on May the 26th. The city was served. I sent a courtesy copy to the mayor and to the city manager. The city was formally served today because I just got the summonses back yesterday. So it seems to me that reading Exhibit A and the highlighted portions, you'll see that as of last month, the planning department was recommending against approval of this rezoning because it did not meet any of the criteria of Section 14. I don't have the exact code reference, but I can get it for you, that they are now saying it does under Section 14-3.5C. It says none have been met.
Excuse me for 1 second, Mr. Farber. Commissioner Farber.
Mr. Farber, you can assume, at least on my account, and my fellow commissioners, I believe we've read the packet upside down and sideways, as we always do. I noticed the same discrepancy, but I think there are probably other interpretations as to what's going on there with regard to one example of a prototype of what we could, in fact, cite if we were to deny the case, whereas the staff report recommends approval. It could simply be a bureaucratic inconsistency. There may not be something insidious and nefarious about this at all. Thank you.
Commissioner Pava, may I respectfully submit to you that I heard from Mr. Esquivel that changes were made, that input was received from the applicant to change, and that change happened since that document was Exhibit A was prepared, which is proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law to get you to accept the recommendation to deny to not approve a recommendation to approve the rezoning. I garbled that sentence, and I'm very sorry about that.
Yeah, for the record, we are going to make a recommendation for approval denial to the governing body.
Yes.
This is not the final act.
I understand that.
Or in legalese, as you would say, this is quasi-judicial, and they'll make the legislative decision on the zone change.
Right.
Keep that in mind as the case proceeds this evening.
I will, but it becomes important because I personally would have submitted a rebuttal to the information that we first saw when this was posted online last week. So we have been prejudiced for practically a month by not being told, number one, that the applicant came in and changed things. Perhaps the land use department told them, oh, you should change this, and try and make this seem as if it's a part of the natural evolution. I just happen to think of another thing. It's a quasi-judicial proceeding. I do reserve the right to cross-examine anybody who testifies, and I understand that I can be cross-examined. But that's an essential component of a quasi-judicial proceeding. And another essential component of a quasi-judicial proceeding is that we be given proper notice so that we can adequately respond. And I submit to you, and I think it's hard for the commissioners to get the packet of information right before the weekend. Read it carefully, and thank you for telling me, Mr. Pava, that everybody reads it, because my thing was 50 pages. But you wouldn't know from looking at the zoning application that it was in opposition to the zoning, because there's nothing that says that in the zoning application that has been presented to you or in any of the outlines. And the same with Mr. and Mrs. Noble, who are fine, upstanding, non-discriminatory residents.
Mr. Farber, keep to yourself, please.
What was asked of Ms. Espinosa was, are you willing to have a covenant on this property that you will not split it? That was it. If it were to be an R2, would you be willing to have it always just be 2 lots? And she said no. And she said to me, and I don't know if Ms. Vigil recorded it because it was on Zoom, would you be willing to do that to your property? And I said, yes, I would. So it's not trying to be exclusive. It's not trying to be discriminatory. It's not trying to say, oh, someone can't live in the area. It's saying the zoning rules need to be followed, and it's inappropriate to use a boundary adjustment, because this property is under 2 acres, that was made 20 years ago because a woman was living on the property, came to the city council, asked that they expand her R1 to R2 so that she could sell a piece so she could live on the property. She ended up moving, selling the property, and it's been there and there since then. So things have been stable in that area, and that's why this becomes a very important issue from a land development standpoint and not from a personal standpoint. Because once you approve, if you recommend approval, of moving this from R1 land, and it's surrounded by R1 land. Now, I see David Schutz here, or he was. David wants to talk. His property was in the county when he has, I think, 5 or 6 houses. In 1998, there's a letter about the sewer. When it got, and then came into the city. It's across the street. It's on the north side of the Arroyo de los Chamisos. It's not a part of the Sully Lomas Arroyo Chamiso area that is recognized in the general plan. And it becomes very important to recognize that the general plan is just an advisory document. It was approved by a resolution. A resolution is just an expression of the will of the council. It's not an ordinance. The future land use map is just advisory. It is not a law.
Is that why the city charter that you were working on
No.
includes in section 2.06 mention of the general plan?
Yes, it's for guidance. It can be referred to for sure, and I'm referring to it. But it's only advisory because the land use department says, oh, because it's general use 1 to 3, therefore it's okay. But that's not the way it works. The way it works is zoning. There's an R1. The property is surrounded. To the north is R1 property. To the east, Mrs. Rubenstein opposes the rezoning. That's R1 property. To the direct south, Mr. Tiano, that is R1 property, and his letter was rejected, and I copied and pasted it and put it in the public comments, and we'd like to be able to read that to you. I don't live next to this property, but I am concerned about the area, and I am concerned about the principle. And the principle is neighborhood preservation.
If you wouldn't mind wrapping it up so we can.
Thank you. Mr. Pava has told me that you've read this, and if you've read my submission, you will see the maps that focus in on the area which is really should be the review area, not all the way down to St. Michael's Drive. That's after that roundabout at Miguel Chavez, that DiGianni zoning thing. That was right across the street from Weta McGregor's relatively dense development. That's not what exists at Zia and Botolf. And further, the letter from the girls' school, which Ms. Lewin is here, was never even included in your packet of information. So the early neighborhood notification was not mailed to the neighborhood. The affidavit shows it wasn't mailed as the law requires. I asked the city for copies of the receipts showing that it was received by the neighborhood association. That's never been provided to me. The requests, I even requested drafts of the prior reports.
Councilor, I think you're getting into the legalese of things.
But that's what you're doing, though. You planning commissioners, to be candid, have an extraordinarily important job. And it's so important. I mean, nobody can vote against you. No one can remove you except the mayor. But so we rely on your judgment. We rely on your good faith. We rely on your understanding the legalities and the technicalities, and also the guiding principle of the Home Rule Charter.
Thank you, Councilor.
I'm open to questions. I hope that I've covered some of the areas, and if you have any other questions for me about anything that I've said, about any of my background, about any of my history, about any of my love for Santa Fe, which is what yours is. I know it's great.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Hinojosa.
I'd just like to differentiate between the substantive issues on the application and then all of these extraneous allegations against the process. So if I can get a clarification on the process. Is there some, maybe from the city attorney or Mr. Esquivel, is there some kind of obligation that the city has to provide any and all interested parties with information every time an applicant amends their application? I mean, it seems to me that it goes into a public records general forum. Is that correct? But Mr. Farmer is alleging that he should have somehow received notice of an amendment. Could you clarify that for us, please?
Mr. Chair, members of the council, Commissioner Hinojosa Falls. There's nothing in Chapter 14 that requires me to provide any kind of application to the balance of the city of Santa Fe. We do our best to provide the application to those that are interested in the application, that those that are interested in the process. We do our best to provide them the application. That application is open to the public. If they don't request it, and they don't request it in time for the review, and we don't get it to them, that isn't something that we have some tickler file that says this applicant is interested in this application. We have to send him a copy of the application. We don't do that. That would involve way too much resources for the city of Santa Fe to endure. We just can't do that. We do our best to give everybody a copy of the application upon request. In terms of the application process itself, that was talked about by Mr. Farber. There is nothing that, let me back up. The city, the staff is going to work with the applicant, not, in this case, Mr. Farber is not the applicant. If the applicant wants to amend their application, we will accept that amendment as long as it's within a time frame that allows the staff to review and incorporate that review into the Planning Commission's packet. The Planning Commission has often amended the application after the application has been submitted, and that amendment never went to the applicant at all, or to anybody. So if an application comes in, staff will work with the applicant to achieve the goal necessary to meet Chapter 14. Chapter 14 being a product of the code, which is a product of the charter. We follow the ordinances that are adopted, and we will review in accordance to those ordinances. I will make a judgment call as to what I will review per the application so that I can provide all the necessary information I can possibly give this body to make an informed and comfortable decision. Mr. Farber's comment that I should have narrowed it down, well, that is an opinion. And as far as my opinion is concerned, I gave what I believed this Planning Commission needed in order to assess the application for their own goals and beliefs and for a decision that you believe is necessary for this product.
Thank you. May I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
Just to clarify, we're talking about 1.41 acre lot, correct?
Yes.
And if the application for rezoning were to be granted, according to our TUS requirements, the most you could have would be 3 dwellings on that property. Is that correct?
No. The most that would ever occur on an R2 district with an acreage of 1.41 acres is, with a density of 2, would be 2.
2 dwellings.
So you would be able to have 2 dwellings and 1 guest house if it was 1 lot, or if they divided the property, they'd be able to have 1 dwelling per lot, and each lot would be eligible for an accessory dwelling unit. So each lot would have a house and guest house.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, I want to get back to the public. They're waiting in line, so let's hold off the rest of the questions. Mr. Farber, if I can move on.
Our objection is that that's
Please.
4 houses when there would be 2.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, my name is Tom Noble. I live at 2255 Old Arroyo Chamisa Road. Unfortunately, I think you have heard my name several times here tonight, and I must say I deeply, deeply resent the implications of what Ms. Espinoza is intimating about us. We never said that we had any problem with her family or with her ability to use the land. I gotta say it. I mean, these are basically racist overtones, and I really resent it, and I hope you all do too. It had no place in this meeting. It has no place in this discussion. It has nothing to do with the issues at hand. Also, as Mr. Farber said, we never asked her who was going to occupy the property. That's just nonsense. And I would like to have that made part of the record as well. That was never part of it. Now, let me go on a little bit here. When Ms. Espinoza bought the property for $155,000 from Mr. Tiano, she kept it for a while, and then I don't know where this family idea happened, but it was put on the market, and we have the listing if you want to see it. She put it on the market for $325,000 for 6 months. This does not sound like a woman who was going to have her children live there. After that, she took it off the market. And she has there's nothing wrong with her using the property for her children. I don't have any problem with that. She can keep it as an R1 lot and build a whole family compound if she wants. There's nothing that prevents her from doing that. So this idea that she has to split it to provide for her children is a fiction. And I want that made clear tonight. Second of all, Mr. Farber said something right at the end that's important here. Mr. Escabel did not actually answer your question. There can be 4 residences, a house and an ADU or a guest house on each of the 2 lots if this is approved. So let's be clear. We're really talking about 4 structures here on an R2 lot, and that's going to be, with any situation you come up against, that's going to be the situation. That's the case. Now, as to this exhibit here, which I listened very carefully to Mr. Escabel's comments, and he never said that something had changed. I don't understand why this Exhibit A, the original Exhibit A that should be in your packet, what changed in the applicant's reapplication that made this suddenly become something that you all should approve. Let me read the very last statement here. The Planning Commission should recommend that the governing body deny the requested rezoning because the application did not meet all the applicable code criteria for recommendation of approval for the proposed rezoning. Suddenly, at least one out of the 3 structural issues that she had to meet, she suddenly met. And I think we ought to talk more about that. I think what was in this original document is absolutely accurate. And I don't understand why this was suddenly changed and we didn't get any notice about it. But that's a separate issue. I want to go back to the fact that she listed this property because I've seen the listing. I'm a real estate broker, and I've seen the listing. And I want you all to understand here that the very first line in the listing...
Mr. Noble?
Yeah.
If you'd stick to material facts, I don't know that...
Let me just quote this very first line in the real estate listing, okay? This is a rare lot with a country feeling, and that goes right to the heart of the matter. I've lived in my house for 44 years, and I cherish and treasure the semi-rural character. And this is exactly what we're talking about here tonight. I hope I'm not straying in any way, shape, or form. It's unfortunate that there was a lot split north of the Arroyo. We can get into that, but I'm not going to. Because this proposed R2 touches that lot split, that's one of the criteria she's hanging her hat on. That was a mistake. It should not have happened. So we are proposing tonight that the Arroyo, I'm going to use the metaphor, we want a line in the sand. And let's make that line in the sand Arroyo Chamizo and protect everything south of there. Mr. Escabel quoted, I think he kind of cherry-picked the data to show that 2.4 was an average lot density. That's using all the apartments to the north and the west. If you go south and east, there is nothing but R1. My last point. We live in an old neighborhood that has been developed slowly over many, many years. If you go look at Soli Lomas, which I also adjoin on the east side of my property, that was first annexed, I think, in 1972. And yet, they are totally protected from any lot splits by the nature of the master plan. Whereas we, independent lot owners in these older neighborhoods, have no such protection. And we're asking you to recognize that and give us the line in the sand and make it Arroyo Chamizo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Noble. For the rest coming up, if you would please not be redundant. If something's been said, you let us know you agree with that, but don't be redundant and stick to material facts for the case. Thank you.
My name is Elise Noble, and I live at 2255 Old Arroyo Chamisa Road, a road which I actually came before the County Commission to ask them to name many years ago, about 40-plus years ago, because we didn't have a name then. My husband and I moved to the Arroyo Chamisa neighborhood in 1969, and we moved to our current home in 1978 with our 2 children who grew up there and who still come back there. Our house was built in the early 1940s, well after the house to our west and to the east of the lot that is being proposed for a split, and long after a house nearby on Old Arroyo Chamisa Road built in 1867, according to the county assessor's records. I'd also like to mention, because Ms. Espinosa mentioned that what she called 6 apartments were there. There is on about more than 2 acres, there were 5 little houses and 1 big old house that is the one that dates back to 1867. And they were not developed, and they were, if anything, since we purchased them, rescued from falling apart. We did not increase the footprint of anything or increase the number of residences there. Our Arroyo Chamisa neighborhood, the AC of Axel, may have been the inspiration for the 1-acre minimum covenants that now protect Foley Lomas. Ironically, our older neighborhood is now vulnerable to losing its cherished semi-rural nature because of the requested R2 zoning for the lot on Botolf. The R2 zoning of the property across the Arroyo to the north of 2339 Botolf, which is the piece that the applicant is saying, in a sense, justifies another R2 because of its proximity, that zoning was a mistake. It's an island of 2 small lots in a sea of larger tracts, and upzoning 2339, because it touches an R2 parcel, would just compound that mistake. And it would set a dangerous precedent. Just as my father used to play with me and say the foot bone is connected to the ankle bone, is connected to the shin bone, is connected to the knee bone. It would set a precedent for upzoning adjacent properties to the east and to the south, all the way to Rodeo Road and all the way to St. Michael's. 1 parcel at a time, kind of like dominoes. Perhaps the mistake that created the R2 island can't be undone. But zoning a tract on the south side of the Arroyo, which is a natural boundary and which has not been challenged until today, means that our older neighborhood, which predates Foley Lomas and therefore lacks covenants, will not be preserved. I would also like to say that I was very hurt that after the ENN meeting that I attended via Zoom, and where I found that although I raised my hand to be recognized, I was ignored over and over and over, that Ms. Espinosa would make the charges that she made of bias. That is very hard to hear, and I hope you understand that if she felt that way, I'm very sorry that she felt that way, but it certainly is painful for me to have somebody say that about me. Thank you.
Thank you. While Chair Gutierrez has stepped out, he asked me to invite the next person to come to speak.
Hi, my name's Phyllis Weiland, and I live at 2114 Calle Azulejo. I've been a resident or, homeowner in Soliloma since 1984, and I'm one, or whatever, this has been a little disturbed or upset because the bike path that we've used for all these years and walking path has been closed in the last 2 years or so. And so the concern that I have is that this path is one of our shortcuts that we all, I don't know if if you've lived in neighborhoods as a kid or whatever, you had your shortcut. But it's through kind of a utility area with there's some let's say light poles. And anyway, and it's a way to get to the, Albertsons, Walgreens, UPS now. We have some, in our little shopping center now, we also have some, the Dragon, whatever, some restaurants, let's put it that way. So anyway, so it's been a very useful area. I know when my kids went to Capshaw, that was the way all the kids got back and forth as well to get to the area. There are 3 schools over there. So anyway, Santa Fe, I know we want to be a, walkable and biking area, and even in all the neighborhoods. And I just want to say that, I would like to see that if this is approved, that there would be a condition that would maybe require that this pathway for bicyclists and pedestrians could be reopened so we could use our neighborhood more conveniently. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Lee Lewin. I am a trustee of the Santa Fe Girls School. The school...
Give your address, please.
I'm representing the school, which is 310 West Zia.
Thank you.
At the corner of Zia and Botolf, directly across the street from the property in question. I had sent a letter to Mr. Esquivel on March 22nd regarding the school's concerns. I didn't see it in the records, so I ask your permission to read it. It is not long. And I'd like to read it into the record and make sure you guys have copies of it.
We don't need copies, just give a copy to Melissa and please read it into the record.
For submission to the Santa Fe Planning Commissioners to be included in the packet of materials. To the members of the Santa Fe Planning Commission regarding 2339 Botolf Road, rezoning application. Dear City of Santa Fe Planning Commissioners, the Board of Trustees of the Santa Fe Girls School is writing this letter to formally state its concerns and opposition regarding the proposed upzoning of 2339 Botolf from R1 to R2. This tract of land is located at the northeast portion of Botolf and Zia. The Santa Fe Girls School is an independent, nonprofit middle school for girls in grades 6, 7, and 8. The school is in its 22nd year of operation and has owned its current location, 310 West Zia, at the intersection of West Zia and Botolf since 2001. The school is directly across the street from the 2339 property, whose owner is making an application to the Planning Commission for an upzoning from R1 to R2. Our main concern lies with the fact that the Botolf sewer line is a 2-inch low-pressure line that runs uphill. The sewer line currently serves 8 E1 pumps on 8 properties. An upzoning of 2339 to R2 would result in at least an additional 4 dwelling units, 2 houses each with a guest house or ADU, and 2 more E1 pumps, pushing sewage into this 2-inch line. Further, we note that the ENN form submitted by the owner, and again, this was in March 22nd that I sent this. In addition, further, we note that the ENN form submitted by the owner stated that the proposed density was 1 to 3 units per acre, and we are concerned that the proposed development might in the future be even more dense than R2. At the ENN, the owner refused to be bound to only 4 additional dwelling units. The school is the lowest and most vulnerable property on the entire sewer line. As the trustees of the school, we have a responsibility to look out for the health and the welfare of our students. We are very concerned about the real possibility that with the additional sewage load from additional units on the tiny low-pressure line, there will be sewer backups that result in sewage flooding the school. In addition to the sanitary and hygiene issues, a sewage backup creates potential high costs to the school and to the city as well, for currently, I must be missing a sentence in this. Okay, I'll just go to page 2. Oh, got it. And to the city as well for remediation of damage caused by a backup on a city sewer line. Was that all pretty clear? Okay. Currently, there is no R2 property south of the Arroyo Los Chamisos other than a small unbuildable sliver that crosses the arroyo and which is the southern edge of an R2 property that lies to the north of the arroyo. We understand from city staff that any R1 property that adjoins an R2 may apply for R2 rezoning and may pursue city approval for the upzoning. We have a concern that the proposed upzoning of 2339 Botolf to R2, which the application justifies because it is contiguous with the R2 sliver, will result in a cascade of new applications for R2 for properties south of the arroyo. This likely future scenario would further compromise the 2-inch Botolf sewer line. For the reasons we have stated, the proposed upzoning would seriously endanger the school's position as the lowest property on the 2-inch line and possibly create unsanitary conditions for our students. We respectfully request that the City Planning Commission support the school's concerns about the likelihood of the 2-inch Botolf sewer line failing and flooding the school with sewage, and deny the application of R2 zoning for the tract of land identified as 2339 Botolf. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, my name is James Espinoza. I am brother to my sister here, Shelley Espinoza. Let me brag a little bit about my sister, if I may.
Mr. Espinoza?
Yes.
Your address, please.
Oh, my address is, my physical address is 1735 Espinoza Lane in Santa Cruz, New Mexico, 87567. I will brag a little bit, if I may, about my sister. My sister is the youngest of 7 children. We are 7 in the family. I am the oldest, and she is the baby of the family. I have 6 sisters, no brothers. And when I look at my sister, I see beauty. I see motherhood. She's been a great mother to 3 children. She is a great achiever, in my opinion. And she is has great determination. I feel that she has worked very hard as a mother, as a student, as a person, to be able to afford this property in the beautiful city of Santa Fe. And why not? We are from original families from 435 years ago, including the Delgados, the Padillas, the Salazars, the McKenzies. You see McKenzie Street right out here? He was our great-great-grandfather, and he was the first to have a band at the local plaza here in Santa Fe many years ago. That was Mr. McKenzie, and you can see his picture around town. So we are from here. My mother, my dad is from the beautiful Espanola Valley. My mom was raised here in Santa Fe. And we We're part of the colonization that took place here in Santa Fe. And now you're telling my sister, you can't be part of Santa Fe. We are here. We now own Santa Fe. And why do we want you here, near us? That is being, in my opinion, very elitist. I feel that my sister is a very classy lady, and whatever she does with her property will be done with a lot of class and beauty for Santa Fe. She believes in this city. She loves this city, as we all do. It's our capital city. We're proud of it. It's beautiful. It's the city difference, as we all know, and it is a beautiful city, different from any other city in the world. And we love it. We respect it for what it is, and we respect its citizens, its people, and we want to be respected as, I will say it, as Hispanics. That's what I am. That's what my sister is. We are Hispanic. We love everybody. We are not prejudiced. It is very obvious. Look at the city of Santa Fe. I believe it's now, 75% or only about 25% Hispanics that live within the city limits. We can't afford living in the city of Santa Fe anymore. It's expensive. We all know that. My sister can. She can afford to live in the city of Santa Fe. And she will do things with class, with beauty, with dignity. As a beautiful person and a beautiful family. And that's why I'm here tonight. I love my sister. I respect her. And I think that you all are in the positions that you are in because you deserve to be there. And because you have a love for this city as well. And as I said before, my sister will do it with dignity, with class, respect. She will respect her neighbors, and I hope they respect her as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Espinoza.
Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, I'm going to keep my remarks brief. I'm sure you'll understand why. It's getting late. I want my remarks.
Name and address for the record, please.
Sorry. Mr. Farber mentioned a couple of times in his remarks.
Your name and address for the record before you get started.
600 Cielo Grande, Santa Fe, 87505.
And your name?
Mr. Farber.
No, your name for the record, please.
What's that? What's your name? Oh, I thought David Schutz.
Thank you.
Sorry. Mentioned that he was on the city council as it was relevant to this case. And if it is relevant, then I must tell you that I served on the city council long before he did. And I preserved the culture and the preservation of the city of Santa Fe as he did. I am the property owner directly across the street from the property in this case. Presumably, I would be the most impacted since I'm the immediate neighbor right across Botolf Road. I've been in the land use planning business for over 30 years, involved in rezonings and other matters coming before this commission and council. And I believe I know a little bit about it. And for the life of me, I don't really comprehend the justification or the rezoning, the opposition's rezoning request were opposed to this. The Bolt Road community enjoys a very special semi-rural environment. Half-acre lots, third-acre lots, a lot of open space, access, walking distance to Albertsons and Walgreens and UPS. And it's a very nice area. And we enjoy a very nice, as Mr. Noble said, semi-rural environment. And we want to keep it that way. But this request, if approved, does not violate that concept. In fact, if you look at the Arroyo de los Chamisas, which runs through my property north, and I might add that that's not the line of demarcation for zoning requests. The line of demarcation is the Land Development Code and this body. North of my property and the Arroyo de los Chamisas, it's all R3 and R5 zoning. This commission and the council have approved those densities over and over and over again over the last 2 decades. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is that this is, we cannot aspire to have affordable housing or more affordable housing without higher densities. Study after study after study dictates that we have to have higher densities in order to provide more affordable housing. It's as simple as that. And this is not considered high density. The cases that you reviewed before this one, those are high density. You had 60 units on 16 acres or whatever it was. That's high density. That's more affordable housing. This doesn't even come close to that. So I tell you that, I'm in support of this request. It doesn't bother me at all. I think it's total keeping with the rural environment that we enjoy there. And, we welcome her to the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. Is there anybody else in the public who has not spoken that would like to speak? I'm going to close the public hearing. If there's questions from commissioners of anybody that has spoken in the public, I will reopen it. Otherwise, the public hearing is closed, and we will move on to questions from the commission. Mr. Farber, I'm under the impression that as the applicant, you do not have that authority. That's for the applicant only, am I? Come up to the mic, please. We need to get this on the record.
Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, and I hope you understand that I do respect you, having worked with you hard. In a quasi-judicial proceeding, based upon my understanding, it's not just a one-sided affair where the applicant comes and gets the opportunity to direct the course of the proceeding. You, of course, have direct the course of the proceeding. You make the decisions, yes, no, but as a part of the public record with regard to the right of cross-examination, the various people who have participated have an opportunity, if they've asked for the right of cross-examination, which I did to attempt to clarify a couple issues, to be able to exercise that basic due process of law right. The city of Santa Fe, in the Candlelight case, the association argued that one of the reasons they were provided process was because the Planning Commission and the EN and the Planning Commission had so much opportunity for give and take. Well, that hasn't happened, and this is not personal to any of the planning commissioners. We're talking about a fundamental issue of due process of law for me to be able to clarify a couple points that were raised. I'd like to ask questions of Mr. Schutz. I'd like to be able to ask questions of Ms. Vigil. I'd like to be able to ask questions of Mr. Esquivel that are germane to the testimony, the sworn testimony that they have provided, and I respectfully submit that it's not one-sided and that shutting down the opportunity of opponents to be able to ask questions on cross-examination is...
Counselor, let me get an opinion from...
The opinion from the
Ms.
city
Benali.
attorney about the extension of a day is so wrong based upon the city code that I'm...
Counselor, please.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, the right of cross-examination in these cases is not present. And in any case, Mr. Farber is not a party to this case. He is a member of the public. So in this case, Mr. Farber certainly does not have any right to cross-examine anyone.
Thank you. With that opinion, we'll move forward. Mr. Farber, if anybody has questions of you, I will reopen the public hearing. If any commissioners have questions of you. Otherwise, we're going to keep the public portion of this hearing closed, and we're going to move forward with commissioners. Mr. Esquivel.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'd like to explain the findings that were in the packet. Typically, when the staff writes the findings, we write the findings in order to reflect the memo. We don't know what direction the planning commission is going to go. The only facts that we have are based on our review and on the memo. And if the planning commission accepts those findings, they're accepting our review. It makes things a nice, easy packet. However, as busy as I am, I have to take responsibility for the fact that I did not make those changes in time, and parts of the findings were errored. Commissioner Botolf found other errors on other findings that I did on another case. Both findings were pulled so that we can address the findings relative to the meeting tonight at a later date. And unfortunately, we did not pull the findings before they went out in the packet, and that's why you found errors in the findings that the neighborhood has identified. And that's how you have that mismatch of information between what was stated in the memo and what was placed in the finding, and I take full responsibility for that as my error.
Thank you, Mr. Esquivel. Commissioner Faulkner, you have the floor.
So to the city attorney, what Dan is basically saying is that the findings and facts don't have standing in the discussion. Is that what he's saying?
That's correct, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Regretfully, no, Mr. Farber. I apologize, but no, I'm going to try and keep the line on this, and we're at the commission discussion now. Commissioners, who would like to go first? Commissioner Faulkner, you still have the floor.
So, Mr. Escobar, could you explain why, and this is just for the record, why you denied it last time, but thought it was, that it was, we could support it this time?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commissioner Faulkner, the staff is always going to work with the applicant. They paid a fee. It's their application. As long as we're able to address those concerns, our job isn't to just approve or deny an application simply because they either meet the regulations or they don't meet the regulations. Chapter 14 is quite complex, and we do our best to help the application along and help the applicant along to achieve their goals, just like we would a building permit. If they're not building in a certain way, our review process guides them in a direction through conditions or other avenues in order to get them to that health and safety process. There's no difference between an applicant and the planners. If an application is not necessarily going on the right path, we will nudge it as best we can. There is a difference between being completely off and just barely off. The application originally, in my view, was off. It's not my job to rewrite their application for them. It's my job to inform them that, hey, look, you're not going to meet the rules, you're not going to meet the criteria, I'm going to have to recommend denial. At that point in time, the applicant has the ability to withdraw their application, postpone their application, revise their application in order to meet the necessary requirements in order to achieve those goals. So we do work with the applicant. We'll work with every applicant that comes in. That is our job. Our job is to get an application to meet the regulations, not to be a judge and decide whether it's up or down simply because they weren't perfect on the initial submittal. So the applicant did that. We had meetings, we discussed the issues, and they revised their application in order to meet those standards that I believe are in line with the zoning criteria for me to recommend approval. Otherwise, I would not have.
So the criteria didn't change. How the applicant approached the property development changed to meet the criteria?
Yes and no. Originally, the applicant submitted an application that identified that the need for the change was based on the change of the surrounding area. That's what prompted me to investigate the surrounding area to see whether or not there was significant change to justify the applicant's statements. And I found that there was not a significant change. So they targeted number 2 on the rezoning criteria as opposed to number 3 on the zoning criteria. When they changed their application, they no longer made a change to number 2 on the zoning criteria, and I'm talking about the double I's. They targeted the 3rd one, which in my opinion was good enough to meet that standard, but they would not have met double I, because when I investigated the property, all of it, I found that over the 40-year span, they did not meet it. There was no significant change to the area that warranted a change in zoning, and that's when they made a different submittal or amendment that addressed item 3 as opposed to item 2. So that's how we got to that point.
Okay, and then I have a question for the attorney, the city attorney. In any way has the public's access to due process been violated in this process, related to this case?
Commissioner, no. All of our regular processes involving public comment, written and at the meeting, have been followed to the best of my knowledge, and all of the information that we and staff have been given has been conveyed to the commission.
So you've done nothing exceptional in this case that would separate it from any other case that we've had before the commission?
No, not at all. And I believe there's probably been more public comment in this case than in most cases.
Okay, and then the third question is one of the members of the public mentioned that if I understood them correctly, that they were using this property to access the arroyo? Is that an accurate understanding? And that's one of the concerns, is they would lose access to the arroyo if this property was developed?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is what one of the members of the public did identify.
To get to the trail. Great. So, thank you. So to be clear, this is private property, and any use of that property outside of permission from the owner would be considered trespassing and not an easement? Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that's going to go into private easements, whether a judge would allow it or not. I don't really think I can give that kind of legal advice. I think that's more of a private matter between the neighbors and the applicant as to whether or not a judge would actually rule that there's been some longevity of use of that property in that, but we would not look at that at this case.
Oh, so, but right now, that access point is not technically or formally an easement for the public use to get to the trail? As it stands right now, as it is before us?
That was not reviewed by me. We'd have to defer that to the applicant.
Commissioner Faulkner, would you repeat that, please?
The question is there an easement? Is that access point that the public is using to get to the trail, is that an easement?
There's a revocation that was signed by all three neighbors, the one to the east, the one to the south, and Ms. Espinosa taking that easement away. And so they've all agreed that this would not be a through easement to any of their properties. And that's why they have gone so far as putting up fences. Ms. Espinosa has not done that, but the other neighbors have.
Okay, what I'm trying to get at is there a legal easement there?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's it, thanks.
Commissioner Bava.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to follow up on the easement issue. Whether this is zoned R1 or possibly changed to R2, we couldn't impose a requirement that there be an easement. Am I correct? I'm sorry, Ms. Ficali.
Commissioner Fava, members of the commission, I don't believe that you can. I've not seen that happen.
It would be imposing a condition on a rezoning, which we
Correct.
generally,
Yeah. As a rezoning,
not good
that would
practice.
be-
Yeah.
That would be very strange.
All right. Let's say the property stays R1 or becomes R2. Is there anything from preventing the neighbors to negotiate in good faith and have a contractual agreement whereby there is an easement on the property? It's not our purview, of course. Okay? That's a private matter, isn't it?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, good. Let's get that clearer. I will admit for the record that when I lived in Vargas Heights, I trespassed across your property. And as a matter of fact, wouldn't it be nice if we could have a pathway? But as a matter of fact, it's private property, and you have to have compensation when you're taking private property for a public purpose. So I think that the whole issue is based on Commissioner Faulkner's questions and mine. It's a discussion for another time, and it's not contingent on the rezoning. Thank you. Second question. Does staff know the designation of Botolf Road? Does it say, is it a collector, a minor arterial, or just a residential street?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I did not look at that. All I know that it was a public access easement. I would have to pull up GPS or GIS and compare it. If you want to give me a few minutes while you continue to deliberate, I'll see if I can get that answer for you.
Okay. For now, that'll be my questions. I may have more.
Thank you, Commissioner Pava.
Yes,
Commissioner Hinojosa.
thank you. Am I on? Yes. Okay. I just wanted to make a clarification for the record with your help, Mr. Esquivel. It's been mentioned by Mr. Farber that somehow you changed your determination on whether this body, the commission, should approve or deny. But in fact, all you're doing is making a recommendation to us. You don't actually have the authority or the power to make that decision, correct?
That is true. I only am making a recommendation to the planning commission.
Right. So this collateral attack that's been going on this evening against yourself and the city, it appears to me that it's inapplicable because you don't have that authority in the first place, correct?
Not in this case, no, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Pava.
Preface my remarks in saying that I've had 4 decades of planning experience. I've sat on planning commissions. I've been staff to planning commissions. I know how this process works, sometimes how it's dysfunctional, how it can be perceived to be dysfunctional. I'm a fellow of the American Planning Association, not an honor lightly bestowed. I have to say that a simple rezoning like this, or what appears to be a simple rezoning, sometimes takes on more time and effort and passion than, say, a text amendment, or frankly, amending the freaking comprehensive plan. And you know what, folks? That's the way it should be in Santa Fe, because we are special, as was pointed out today. We are so unique. And that's what makes a case like this so very, very difficult, where you could say, oh, it's clear, I'm going to vote this way, or it's clear, he's made a decisive case. Yeah. So let's look at the charter that Mr. Farber talks about. The charter's emphasis indeed does point out neighborhood preservation and cultural preservation. I think what we heard tonight was that there are issues with both here, and neighborhood and cultural sometimes are the same in Santa Fe, and sometimes there's different nuances to it. And we have a very complicated history in Santa Fe, and in that regard, frankly, the charter is about as clear as the Second Amendment, or at least the way people interpret it, all right? It's a little bit muddy. I think you can interpret it different ways. And others than Mr. Farber were on that commission. One of them sitting right here on our planning commission right now. I think there's ways to interpret the charter. And the charter does, as I mentioned earlier, include mention of the general plan, which it says that the plan will be implemented through goals, policies, objectives, revised, so on and so forth, through ordinances and resolutions. Well, that's what we're looking at tonight. We're making a recommendation to the governing body, to the council, on a rezoning. That is an ordinance. So, you know, frankly, to sum up, I've heard some excellent quantitative analysis from Mr. Esquivel and staff, and I've also heard many excellent qualitative arguments of merit, as well as the procedural issues here, the due process, and the substance. What I don't see in the charter is that it promotes despairing city staff with innuendos, allegations, or conspiracies. And although that's not part of the case here, I can assure you that it does have a bearing on our consideration of this case, and that's all I'll say.
Thank you, Commissioner Pava. Commissioner Hinojosa.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay. Give me 1 second here.
Okay.
Before we go to a motion.
Mr. Chair, I could answer Commissioner Pava's question. Botolf is a minor collector.
Botolf is a minor collector.
Minor collector, right?
Yes, and I live on a minor collector called Camino O'Leary. And, you know, it's interesting. I got Section 8 on one side. I live in a townhouse that's 10 units to the acre. There are mobile homes. There's all kinds of stuff. It is Que Viva Santa Fe. It's what Santa Fe is about. Okay? So Botolf's a minor collector. It's not just a residential street. Streets like this serve a purpose in planning, and there are transitions, and properties along those may have transitional natures. So this is all very interesting. Thank you.
Other commissioners? Mr. Esquivel, listening to your answer to Commissioner Faulkner, you said Article 3 in the changed, they changed that, and that's what helped you with your decision to recommend approval, correct?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is correct.
Do you mind reading Article 2 and 3 into the record?
Chair, what I'll be doing is reading it from my memo, since I have copied and pasted in there so that you can read along with me.
That'll work perfect, thank you.
This is going to be located in, I believe, Table 6, Criteria 1, 1435CA. There are 3 criterias that the applicant has a choice to make. It's one or they only need to make one. They can meet as many, but they only need one. One or more of the following conditions exist. There was a mistake in the original zoning. No. There has been a change in the surrounding area altering the character of the neighborhood to such an extent as to justify changing the zoning. I believe that my exhibits within the memo have identified that is not true. Number 3, a different use category is more advantageous to the community as articulated in the general plan or other adopted city plans. So this one's a little bit long-winded, but I believe that they've complied with this criteria. In that community, the way the city is looking at it is the community of the city of Santa Fe. Community is not an ENN or the amount of people that attend an ENN. Community is not necessarily the adjoining neighbors or the neighborhood association. When we write ordinances for the city of Santa Fe. So community, the way we look at it, is for the city of Santa Fe. By adding additional housing to the city of Santa Fe, by increasing the density that would allow for the additional housing, whether that be affordable housing or not, would still minimally meet the general plan criteria for what they are trying to achieve.
The general plan speaks to this, and that's what helped you with your decision, not to mention that the infrastructure is in this area and readily available, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
I would also like to add that there was a concern with sewer, as brought up by one of the speakers tonight. We did send the letter that was originally provided for the Chutes development. The neighborhood did provide me that, and I did relay that to our engineer at the sewer department, Stan Holland. He has provided comments. They are in the packet, and he did recommend that it was okay to move forward. He did calculate all of the capacity associated with that area and decided that there was enough capacity that would allow for the increase in density should the Planning Commission and governing body zone R2 or update.
You must have read my mind, but here's my question. From Mr. Holland, it's dated March 2022, but there's no date on it. And the letter from the girls' school was sometime in March also. So for the record and for clarity, these did not cross. Mr. Holland did an assessment of the possibility of 4 dwelling units being placed on this property, and there's not going to be issues with other properties surrounding because it's a 2-inch line.
That was his statement to me. He did advise that it is a first-come, first-served basis. So there is limited capacity on that line, and he did mention that. He also did say that with this rezoning, he is going to recommend for it, and that is in your packet from him.
And I see it in the packet, and the subject property are accessible to the city public sewer system. Accessible is defined as within 200 feet of a public sewer line. So that was one of the concerns I had, but as long as Mr. Holland assessed this, knowing that there was a concern from other neighbors, I think I can put that concern to the side.
Yeah. The neighbor that came up and spoke addressed exactly how the issues were. It's a 2-inch line. They do have to use grinders, and they have to kind of take turns in terms of the flushing capacity. And eventually that line is going to have to be serviced, and there's going to be a point in time where our city department is not going to allow any more taps into that line.
Okay, and that 2-inch line is a city-owned
I believe so.
line? Thank you, Mr. Esquivel. Any other commissioners with questions? I'll take a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that the commission approve the applicant's request on case 2022-4942 for a rezoning from R1 to R2.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. If we can have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Faulkner?
Yes.
Commissioner Hinojos Ball?
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence?
Yes.
Commissioner Pava?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. Councilor Farber, I hold you in the highest
Thank
regard,
you.
and I enjoyed working with you also. I'm sorry we have to kind of keep the line here, and so you'll have avenues if you're not happy with the outcome of tonight. Thank you. Patricia, is it okay if we add this in for the record?
Yes, but yes, if you could say what you're putting into a microphone and then give it to our.
Please.
Thank you. First, I would like to say, Commissioner Sofal, if you thought that there were allegations being made, I'm sorry about that. Some things came as a huge surprise to us when we saw this new information. And we try and act professionally, and that's been my stance throughout my entire career as the chair. I think we served together on the Charter Review Commission. He knows that. And I'm sorry that if you took offense to some of our strong comments, because we do feel strongly, and it would have been great if the commission could have gone out on a field trip and seen what we're talking about. But I'd like to just make a part of the record, request number 222983, 222997, and 222988. I'm sorry that wasn't in the, one of them's out of order, which were requests of information to the city for prior drafts and reports and information which would have provided us with an opportunity to respond to you in writing rather than have to do it at this hearing, sometimes in a semi-heated way. And if it offended you, I really am sorry about that.
Not at all, Mr. Farber. I liked your argument on the home charter issue. Point well taken.
I think it's an important provision. 2.04 is more important than 2.06, but if we read it carefully, it's about cultural and neighborhood preservation.
Thank you, Councilor. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Moving on, staff communications.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't believe we have any at this time.
Matters from the commission.
I would just like to thank staff for all the hard work they do. I don't think the public always recognizes how much goes into developing these cases and making sure that the process is followed. So I just want to extend an appreciation to you for all your work.
Thank you. I'd like to echo that. She must have read my mind. Dan read my mind earlier. I guess it's written here. Once again, Maggie, welcome. Commissioners, she's wonderful. Any questions, anything you have? Feel free to reach out to her.
Mr. Chair, I'd like, for the record, to submit these cookies to staff.
Perfect.
For Friday morning, because it's good, I know how it is the night after planning commission. So I'm going to hand these to Mr. Klug to decide to distribute as he sees fit.
Perfect. And thinking back, we were sitting here 20-some months ago, 26 months ago, and Commissioner Satenya was so worried about contingency plans. You guys remember, what are we doing? What are we doing? I thought, oh, you know what? This is going to fly by pretty quick. Well, 26 months later, we're back in person. It's wonderful to be here, and it's an honor to swing this. So if there's nothing else, we're adjourned.